Okie dokes. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our panel about lore crafting and world building. I am Tokyozilla, or otherwise known as Neo, and this is my co-host, BuizelKing, or Robin.
We are going to be talking to you today about all of the different little do's and don'ts, 101s, and simple basics of how to start your lore crafting or world building, whether it be for a D&D campaign, for your original characters, or even for maybe a movie, game, or a comic project you've been working on. We'll mostly be covering basics and a little bit of important information that you'll need to know if you want to start, and maybe even some important stuff to know if you've already started and you just want to get a little bit of an edge up on the competition. And then at the end, we'll be following it up with important resources and websites you can use to help improve your experience a little bit.
Absolutely. And with that, let's get it started. Here we are. So first things first, you will never escape revision. So the thing with that, let's see here, nothing will ever start perfect, and nor will it ever be perfect, and that's perfectly okay. I'm saying perfect a lot, you see here, even despite the fact that nothing has to be perfect. So with that topic, be sure to not beat yourself up with having just starting off with basics. That's the most important message here, with the fact that nothing starts perfect. Everything starts with, sketching. Same with 2D artwork. You have to lay down the lay works, the groundworks, and make sure that you have at least a basis to work yourself up on. And always, the ground foundation does not have to be perfect. And of course, the more you make, the more you learn. The more. Oh, all good. Apparently my head is being cut off, and that's okay. You can look at my face here, but I'm super tall. I'll have to crouch that at some point or another. But with that, the more you make, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more you want to adjust, and all that good stuff. So keeping the momentum is paramount, aka it's incredibly important. And the importance within keeping the momentum is setting goals. These goals don't have to be huge. Just work little by little, and be sure to face your problems that interrupt your momentum head on. Don't let it overcome your motivation. That is the one thing that I see a lot of artists have to deal with, is art blocks. And this, these, how do you call it? Droughts of motivation that can absolutely interrupt your workflow and drive to keep up with world building. And last thing, of course, with this topic is you can't future-proof for everything. You can't, prepare for whatever comes your way, and you just need to roll with the punches for the most part. Contradictions are inevitable. Future-proofing is good, and analysis paralysis is not. It's better to write many things you'll adjust than write one thing you might avoid adjusting.
More than anything, it's incredibly important to make sure that you don't try to make the perfect thing right off the bat. Because whether you like it or not, world building is all about taking what ideas you started with and making them into something more interesting. As you come up with more concepts, you'll find contradictions in your earlier work, or you'll find things that you want to improve. So even if you try to make the perfect piece of information or the perfect world right off the bat, it's just not going to work out, because perfect will shift depending on how you build your world, and simply put, no one knows everything right off the bat. Which leads us into our other very important topic about flexibility in world building. Now, can you hit the slide for me?
Absolutely. Here you are.
First and foremost, it's very important to find balance and rigidity, because first and foremost, a lot of people, whenever they're working on world building, whenever they're making lore, know that lore, simply put, is about making systems and about making rules, so to speak, for your world. So that can lead you into traps where you'll make rules that are too strict or too rigid, because, simply put, a lot of rules typically end up being rigid. And it's important to know that in the real world, rules are very flexible, and there are even sometimes exceptions to them, which is very important for you to emphasize in your world building. Because not every question in life is answered, not every question in your world building needs to be answered. And sometimes doing that is only going to exhaust you, and you won't be able to work on the things you want to work on. So finding a good balance between rigid rules that define your world and rules that can be adjusted and made complex is incredibly valuable to your world-building experience. Flexibility not only helps you continue making your world, but it grants your lore intrigue, and it's where a lot of the big questions come from and where people start asking those questions that get them interested. You should provide satisfactory justification for your happenings, but always leave space for questions to develop. If you give the consumers or the viewers of your product all of the answers to everything they could ever ask, they're just going to get bored because they're not going to have anything about your world that they're still interested in. Can you hit the slide for me?
Absolutely. Here you go.
Then, and on that note, some things just kind of shouldn't be set in stone. Like how not every question in life is going to be answered, sometimes you might just not want to answer them. First and foremost, it's sometimes safe to overestimate your viewer's intelligence, and it is never safe to underestimate your viewer's intelligence. Oftentimes, if you explain something simply, your viewers can fill in the gaps, so you don't actually have to build every single facet of your world, because people can make assumptions. Detail is good, but too much will bore you and your audience, so it's important to consider not just what information your viewers should know, but what they need to know. This especially works great when you're working on Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop campaigns or games, because the position that your viewer is in will change how much information they know. The average person won't need to know the anatomical structure of all of your creatures, but a xenobiologist might, so it's oftentimes important to know what your audience is when deciding what you're going to give them from your world. A great example of this is actually in the Outer Wilds shiplog, which does a great amount of detail and development in how the Outer Wilds world was built, but it doesn't give you the answer to every single question, because first and foremost, you're a starfarer. You don't need to know the deep intricacies of the rock makeup of planets or anything like that. But at the same time, it gives you enough information to know what's going on and know what to do next. And on that, in that same sense, it's important to give ample room to work with your world, much in the same sense that it's important to let your viewers have some space to exist in your world. It's important to give them the opportunity to even fill in some gaps you might leave yourself. A great part of our world building is that it leaves room for those consumers, be it your party in an RPG or your viewers in a movie or comic, to fill in some of those gaps for things like homebrew experiences or just answering the kind of questions that you don't need to answer yourself. The best quote in this that I've heard is a good friend of mine when helping me start world building told me, quote unquote, "No one needs to know the color of your dwarf's toilet paper." And much in that same sense, you don't need to tell everyone every single thing about your lore, because then they're not going to be able to do anything themselves. And when they want to make something that involves your lore, they aren't going to be able to, because every little nook and cranny is already filled for them. It gives your consumers agency and gives them the space to move around this world you've created.
With that, next up, I'd love to discuss theme, focus, and how they drive your lore. So I think it is a rather important fundamental that makes up the basis of world building. And so, you don't want to have something, you don't want to make your story like super convoluted and XYZ. It's good to have a rich and in-depth world, but the process of doing that, you need to make sure that you have focus. You need to ensure that you can maintain focus and draw your audience in with that focus. So there it is, the simplicity of theme. There is a lot to this. It is not black and white. Great world building can often, and not necessarily always, can be summarized in a single comparative statement, and it should be that way, in my opinion. Or you like being able to boil down the theme about your world is rather important, in my opinion. So that you can not only maintain that theme, but also say like you want your friends to like, or like have peers or individuals advertise your game. You need to like sell yourself very quickly with the theme, like an elevator pitch. You do not want to give them a whole roster of like, oh, it has this, and this. You need to boil that stuff down into a single like line or description. So another thing with that though, and that's why I say it's not black and white, diversifying and combining themes is a thing that you can totally do, and something that you should do to enrich your world. So combining themes and creating something new and diverse, say like hope punk or like the whole fantasy versus sci-fi discussion, is super cool. You can mix match these themes and absolutely manifest something that is incredibly new or interesting that can cover a wide variety of subjects, but all in one stroke kind of situation. I hope that's understandable. But that's the thing with fantasy versus sci-fi. That's the stuff that I like to do for my own personal world building. Is mixing fantasy and sci-fi into something that is digestible and entertaining for my audience. Um, and with that, rolling on to the fact that one theme can be very much so explored from one angle. I talked with my friend when going over this panel and like what to discuss about this stuff because, I have understanding from my standpoint only, and this friend in particular was just like, hey, there's this one writer who literally just writes about this one particular theme over and over and over again. And all of those stories intertwine and manifest themselves around this one particular theme, but they explore that one theme from every single angle that they can make up. The artist or the writer is William Gibson, and he uses cyberpunk worlds to explore the concept of human relationships to technology and how it affects their interpersonal relationships. An absolutely cool thing, and being able to just like hyperfixate onto a theme and just explore it from XYZ angle is absolutely incredible. So.
And that's actually very important when it comes to working on inspiration, so that you can look into other sources and other experiences to get information and ideas for these themes. So, first and foremost, it is very important, and I'm going to say something right off the bat that not everyone's going to agree with, but I think you should, in all honesty. First and foremost, there is no such thing as a completely original idea, and it's something that a lot of people tend to strive for, but it's something that's simply not achievable. When it comes to the human experience, any concept you're going to come up with will be some sort of a semblance between ideas you've heard in the past, ideas you've seen. Simply put, you can't make something from nothing. So if you try to, you're just going to burn yourself out, you're going to exhaust yourself, and more often than not, you're only going to hurt yourself, because bringing yourself to those kinds of unrealistic expectations is only going to dampen your world building. That's why, more than anything, it's incredibly important to get out there and research and experience all the things you like and associate with your work. It's absolutely vital if you're trying to make a game, play games. If you're trying to make a movie, watch movies. And if you're trying to build a world, look at other worlds you've seen, whether you like them or not, and try and figure out what about it makes you like it and what about it makes you don't like it. Looking at how your favorite media handles the things you like is the best way to figure out how you can handle the things you like, to emulate the kind of experiences they give you. Now, there is a difference between emulation and inspiration, and concepts like plagiarism or ripping off of things. And the most important thing that it comes to avoiding things like plagiarism, while avoiding keeping that sort of headspace around making a completely original piece of work, is to recognize that a lot of ideas and a lot of world building is about combining concepts. It's not about with thinking of one particular thing or finding one thing someone else likes. It's about seeing all these different things you like and having all these experiences you've brought upon yourself and putting them into something you like. Maybe you're trying to build a sci-fi world and you've seen Star Wars and you like how they handle their military exhibitions. And you've seen Star Trek, and you like how they handle their technology. So you take all kinds of different things, and you combine their core steps and what makes you like them, and turn them into something unique and a semblance of all of their parts. Now, the most important thing when it comes to getting all these experiences is knowing how to consume media like a writer or like a world builder. And the only thing I have to say there is how important it is to analyze. It's important not to just copy what you see, but to be conscious of how you feel about what you're seeing and what exactly sparks those feelings. Using that kind of headspace, you can learn from literally everything, even bad media. So you can look at, for example, maybe you're trying to make a fantasy world for a D&D campaign or a game. And you can look into all kinds of particularly popular and particularly interesting forms of media. You might look into Lord of the Rings and talk about how maybe you don't like how they handle some of their racial systems, but you love how they handle their magic. So you can look particularly not just into the fact that you like it or don't like it, but why you don't. Maybe you don't like the race system because of how it objectifies or vilifies certain races, and you could adapt that and specifically avoid those specific things you don't like, while incorporating things you do like about how other worlds might incorporate race into them. Analytic consumption is all about paying attention to cause and effect. You want or don't want the effect, so you need to figure out the cause of it more than anything. The best way that I can put it is think of what you like about things, distill it down to its base cause, what causes you to like it, and then find something else that brings out that same cause and gives you the effect you want. However, when it comes to looking at this type of media, like I said before, it's important to know what you're looking at and be selective about what you're learning. But that doesn't just go for consuming media. You need to use your own judgment and make what you think is good. So that can even come down into things like this panel itself. There may be some things that we say throughout this panel that you don't like or you don't think would work for your world building, and that's totally okay. All you need to do is consider why you disagree with it and use that to learn from it regardless. Maybe you don't like something we said, so think about why you didn't like it and how it contradicts with the things that you're trying to work on in your world building. You can learn from everything, whether you learn what not to do or what to do. So it's important to make that distinction, and instead of avoiding things you don't like, embrace them and figure out why you don't like it so you don't make the same mistakes as that last person who presented it to you.
Right. Exactly that. Yeah. Again, what Robin said is just like, being able to take what you like and what you don't like. Absolutely, with our panel, take what we say with a grain of salt, and reflect on it. Maintaining motivation in creative media is the next topic that I'm very much so excited to talk about because, oh my gosh, as an artist, let me freaking tell you, it can be really hard to maintain that motivation, as well as cultivating your like inspiration and where to take it from. So first things first. A lot of us as creatives have to deal with any sort of block, writer's block, artist block, just there are blocks in the road that will stump you and absolutely just leave you hanging and sitting in a ditch that you have to crawl out of. And the way you can handle art block or creator's block in general, there's no one answer to it. There's different things that you can do to maintain it or diminish it. And I think first and foremost, the one and very important thing that I want to bring up is maintaining your own physical and mental health. I know it seems a little out of the ballpark, and it might be coming out of the blue, but I think it's something that I don't feel is like discussed enough. Is your own mental health. We all know 2020 was an absolute disaster of a year, and as a creator, like it sapped the life out of me and my work sometimes. So what I did to help and combat creative blocks and whatnot is, of course, exercising, eating healthy. Not enough people say this either. Just sit out in the sunlight, get some sunlight, get that vitamin D. It really helps. And take a walk. You can take inspiration from the world around you, which is the one thing I should talk in this next slide. Inspiration is a very important thing that you need to maintain, and searching for that inspiration is a bit of a bug sometimes. So what I like to do, just admire and appreciate life around you, especially nowadays. You can take inspiration just from taking a walk outside. Look at the plants, smell the air, appreciate life. That will give you the most inspiration. And then, of course, watch movies and consume games and whatnot. And you can absolutely take inspiration from that. But the basis is absolutely appreciate the life and living every day. And that, in my opinion, is the biggest inspiration for me. I want to be able to create for tomorrow. I want to be able to create down the line in years, and I want to be able to inspire people. So, and then last and not least, world building isn't a race. This goes for a lot of things. Be it your skill, your skill level, and how far along you've come with world building. A parallel experience with this that I see in a lot of creators is they will be like, "Oh, I'm not as good as this person. I shouldn't be doing this." Don't ever do that to yourself. That is the worst thing I hate to see, is this lost potential because somebody thinks that their work isn't up there with the others. Don't compare yourself like that. You're shooting yourself in the foot. It is detrimental to your world building and to yourself as a person, in my honest opinion. So be able to step back, say, hey, I'm taking this at my own pace. I'm going to do the best that I can. And that's all that we can ever ask for. And let me tell you, people will enjoy it nonetheless. Let me tell you, because I've been doing this stuff. I literally started like a Patreon and stuff out of the blue. Like, I'm just going to give this a go. I'm going to jab at it. And I've had an amazing support system so far. And it blows my mind that someone is remotely interested in the stuff that I have to put forward. But if I can do it, like you can do it kind of motivation. It might be a little old fashioned, but I really truly think that I'm just some goob who's fumbling upwards on a set of stairs and sort of making it. So here I am making a presentation about it, and I'm just doing it. I started as a hobby, and now I'm doing it for a living. So yeah.
Oftentimes, the most important thing when it comes to motivation is just making sure, both first and foremost, that your body is healthy, because world building is a mental and emotional task. And like all things in life, they're very interspersely interconnected. So if your body isn't apt for it, your mind won't be apt to it. And if your emotions aren't apt to it, your mind won't be apt to it. And even more than that,
110%.
just don't worry about the relative quality of your work, because I can speak from strong experience. The best way to get better at world building is to just do it. So if you worry about how bad you are or good you are compared to someone else, you're just going to work yourself up and you're going to lose your own motivation. So it's important to recognize that, simply put, that's not important. Growth is all part of the process, like for most things. And I don't have a good tie into this last part, but we also have a bunch of resources for you to make sure you can figure out how the heck to do this really easily. First and foremost, when it comes to finding inspiration, sometimes it can be difficult to set down the time and set down the time to watch movies or read through entire webcomics or play 80-hour games. Especially if you want to make something like Persona. I'm sorry, that's a long time. But you can find a lot of inspiration from all sorts of places. For example, places like Twitter or Pinterest, ArtStation, and Instagram can give you all kinds of things like concept art and sketches and examples of other people who have made worlds that you might be interested in. It's incredibly important to look for independent sources for all these kinds of things, because oftentimes big studios and big names that you've heard of are going to have interesting information, but they aren't going to have as dynamic and unique things for one reason or another. And honestly, it's a little difficult, but sometimes I find incredible stuff just by Googling the concept I'm looking for. I actually learned about an entire game series with a really interesting form of subverted cyberpunk aesthetics to it just by Googling aesthetics for space prisoners. And it was one of the most interesting worlds I've ever seen. So you can find all kinds of inspiration in crazy places, so it's important to look for them in all kinds of websites, like these 5. I still can't do it. And then one of, in my opinion, the hardest parts about world building is figuring out how to write down your random ideas. And more importantly, how to write them down without having to take the time to organize them right off the bat. Which is why it's important to use even unorthodox places to get information down quickly and succinctly. Some great places to do this are things like Twitter DMs, where there's even a bot that's just called Bookmarks Plus, where you can keep information in much more easily. Or Telegram saved messages, if you use Telegram a lot. If you don't have a lot of social media or things like that, even just a notepad full of stuff can work in it. And even just unique pages in some of the websites that we describe from the previous slide, or even the one I'm about to get to. Which are the particular great places for that. I think a slide is missing, so I'm going to explain it anyway. The most important, or great places to get some information and places to organize your work are also in existence, and they're the best examples that I have for those are, first and foremost, one that you've probably never heard of called TiddlyWiki, which is a completely free-to-use open source platform that allows you to essentially make a Wikipedia page for all of your world building information. It's totally free, there's nothing you have to pay for it, and you can even Google it. There's also another that a lot of people like to talk about called World Anvil, which does have a number of paid plans, which might not be for you, but if you have the money for it, or even if you're comfortable with the options and limitations they give you in the free version, it can also be a great example. I myself like to use World Anvil, and I've never had any problems with it. Other great places for it are, if you don't want to use a website or an open source media like that, you can even just organize notepad files onto your computer. Or just straight up use Twitter, or in some cases, like Neo here, if you've got something like a Patreon, it can provide its own great places. Yeah, and Toy House.
There's also Toy House, yeah. I absolutely adore Toy House, and there's a whole community and forum for that stuff where It can be used for selling and like dealing with characters, which I think it's what is most known for. But it has a lot of really good resources for keeping information on characters and whatnot. People will make HTML like codes and whatnot on formatting information about XYZ. Oh, what do they like? Oh, what do they dislike? And all that cool stuff about your character, as well as having a whole category for like world building stuff that you can keep. Privatizing it or publishing it is also viable to you. Permissions and authorizations is also a really cool thing that Toy House has. So you can work on stuff together with other people if you want to share that, or you can just keep it to yourself. The one thing with Toy House is that you do need an invite code. So you need somebody on the inside kind of situation, which is the one thing about Toy House that is just like, oh darn, it's not easy to access. But once you get a hold of it, it's phenomenal, and it's been one of my favorite things to use for categorizing my characters and whatnot. With that,
And now we'll be moving to our Q&A portion. However,
great.
That's going to work.
This is my first time doing this. Yeah, any questions? Feel free and ask, I suppose.
Oh. I don't know if we'll be starting with...
Yes, I see Brekar.
We'll start with individuals in the audience. You'll need to move up right to the stage, like right in front of it, to get your questions out.
Right here?
Yes. Yep,
sure, that works.
Yeah.
Just one at a time.
Yep. Sorry, Curio, if you could back up for 1 second. I saw Brekar immediately stand up.
We'll call people up by hand raise.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Brekar.
Hi. From your perspective, what is for someone who's currently doing world building, what is the lowest cost, highest value something someone can do to immediately make their world building better?
Shoot.
Honestly, I would say the lowest cost, highest value thing you can do to get a huge jumpstart into your world building is to talk about it. Talk about it a lot. Find people you're friends with, find people you're interested with, just try and share it and ask for information that they might want to provide to it. Other people might have great ideas that you can bounce ideas off of. Other people might have maybe even things they don't like about your world building. The most important thing, and oftentimes the easiest thing, is to just figure out what other people think of your world so that you can get adjustments based on common consensus. They might even give you ideas that you love and you just never thought of.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think for me personally, though, it is definitely writing it down, getting it all fleshed out so you can look at it and think back on it. Because my issue with that one thing, it took me actually a really long time to even remotely discuss my world building stuff because I thought it sounded stupid, which I think is something that is I guess relatable, hopefully. I hope I'm not the only one who's just like, oh, boo, boo, boo. I don't want to talk about my world building because I think it's really stupid and dorky. But getting over that hump, I think, was very much so just like writing it out. Role playing also, I think, is a really good like resource for that. So if you have friends that you want to do like written role play and do some Shonen Jump stuff. I really like that resource, and I thank my friends for being able to participate in that with me. I still role play to this day, and it's probably one of the most like. Not only is it easy, it's free, and I get to bond with my friends, and I think I get the most out of that. So I hope that.
Thank you very much.
I hope that's no problem. Yeah, thank you for asking. All right, next up. Curio, what's up? What's happening? Yeah.
Okay. Quick question. What was the name of that one Wikipedia page you mentioned that you could like make and like store all your world building characters?
Yes, so some of the biggest examples we gave, I'll actually make sure that I'll actually right now try and get some of these into the Discord channel we have for it. Particularly one that I recommended that was free is called TiddlyWiki, TiddlyWiki. It's an open source platform. You can find it online. It gives you a lot of freedom for using your types of things. And then Neo brought up Toy House, Toyhouse, which requires a key to get into, but it also offers a lot of great, particularly character-centered ways of writing down your lore and things like that.
All right,
is that good? Okay, I will make sure to write this down into the Discord.
Fantastic. All right. I'm seeing Medicine has a hand raised. If you'd like to come up. Yes. Come on up, come on up.
Do you ever do you ever think of a medium kind of to build your world into? And if you do, how much of an effect does it have on the process of building your world? Because for me, when I have those kinds of thoughts, the first thing I think of is usually what medium am I going to put it into? And if my friends have them, I'll ask them what medium are they going to convey their world through.
110%. I've had that thought like right off the bat, and I can say that I very fondly have thought of putting my my creation to a video game. But I think a more like I've also have like backup plan. And just like, hey, if games don't work out in the end, like I'd love to do a comic at some point or another. And so I've definitely prepared my media and my world building to be able to function and work very nicely with the format that is either a game or a comic. So definitely have put that into thought 110%. So yeah.
I think honestly, one of the most important things is to recognize how your media can impose limitations. Or more than anything, I think it changes less how your world functions and more what about your world you give to people who are consuming that media. So, like, if you've got a video game that focuses on a character on one planet the entire time, you might not want to talk about the solar system or how space travel works just because it's not going to be involved with your game. It might still be a part of it, but it might not be something that needs to be as developed because it won't be explained.
Dope. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
No problem. Thank you. I'm seeing a hand raised by Jay. What's up?
Can you hear me?
Yo, hello. Yep. Can
Yep.
hear you loud and clear.
Hi. Perfect. So, as someone who is working on lore and world building for a video game myself right now, I have quite a question because I'm not really sure how to do this. So, due to the fact that for me the world is exactly the galaxy, I have several cultures on several planets. So now I independently created for each of them lore and world building. My problem now is kind of tying it all together, because I realized that several things would not mix up, because if you live close by, like we see it like here on in reality, basically, if you live close by, you still have like cultures in between, you still have like people meeting in between. How would
Oftentimes.
I execute stuff like this in my setting?
Yes. I actually did a great deal of work in a similar type of setting based on sci-fi lore and space and type things, and I came into a similar problem when it came to figuring out how these different planets, because inherently they kind of form themselves to be relatively disjunct, would interact with each other. And the best recommendations I can give for this is kind of twofold. First and foremost, it's important to recognize that there is a difference between how cultures will interact with each other from their starting points and how they'll interact when pushed upon each other. Sometimes these might lead into events that you might want to incorporate, like they might lead into conflicts or even diplomacy between these two types of groups. So it's first and foremost, it's important to know the circumstances with how they interact and how those circumstances can change how they continue to work together in the future. And secondly, it's also important to know that sometimes these might bring up problems or contradictions that are a little too difficult to work through. So it might just require you to make some minor revisions in some of the things that you've already made so that they'll work better together. Like in our first example, revision's going to happen a lot in your world building. So it's important to kind of figure out for yourself what your line is between figuring out something that works and changing something that's already there so that it'll work better and be easier to figure out.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
I agree. Yeah.
Did help me.
Absolutely, no problem. Yeah, very good. A very good question with that, because oh my goodness, I've had the same issue happen with me for my worlds, and I'm like, how do I go about doing that? And do I have to cut out this? Do I have to revise this? And very much so, it's what you said. So, all right.
I'm seeing Seinen in the back. Yes, bring it up.
First off, thank you so much. This is so close to my passion, and just listening to this helps me a lot. But I feel like an issue that I commonly run into involves writing something, and then I kind of get stuck in this process of I'm too worried about revising things later that I'm too scared to kind of continue along in the process, and I kind of get bogged down on this huge product of almost just too much that I don't know what to go through with and what not to. Do you find it to be a good idea, or find a lot of worth in taking breaks or setting aside those bigger projects and just kind of finding something smaller and I guess just going through with those so that I can actually finish something?
110%. 110%. Let me tell you, even the best out there, Hayao Miyazaki, when he was working on Mononoke Hime or Princess Mononoke, he had the biggest stump in the road of like, how do I manifest all of these complex ideas into this really cool movie? Probably one of the like best movies out there that I really thoroughly enjoy. But not to get off topic, he had to deal with that very same issue, and what he ended up working on was a animated music video called On Your Mark, and an absolutely phenomenal like masterpiece, probably one of my favorite like all like out there like animated music videos. It has like this angel that's in like a facility and all that stuff. Super cool, and he did that while he was working on something. So if you have to put something that you were putting all of your heart into on the back burner, don't be afraid to do that. Like absolutely taking a step away and working on something else can give you a new perspective and new stance on that project that you might have not seen before. So again, TLDR, yes. There you go.
I'll also add, it's often very important to, and I know it's way easier said than done, but becoming comfortable with making revisions later. I actually have had this same problem in a lot of world building I've done, where my most egregious example was I was trying to make a religion, like a world religion, or at least like most, a large religion in a world, and I was so caught up on deciding how people might think of this and how that might clash with other groups that it took me like 2 weeks just to figure out a baseline concept for the religion, and it ended up being one of the concepts I came up with towards the very beginning. So oftentimes, if you can handle it and if you can take it, sometimes just write something you're a little worried about, and then if you have to change it later, go for it, because it's not too difficult, especially if you use a nice medium for it, to just go back and adjust some things or rewrite things that might not work anymore.
Okay, thank you so much. This is great.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming. Okay, I've been seeing someone in particular, Kidder666 over there. You have a question? Yes. Come on up.
This is more of a question about priority when it comes to stuff. So I'm trying to write like little like this kind of the general universe out there for more of my characters, for like where personas and stuff fit in. But I'm currently at the point that's like, should I start with how stuff works within the idea of all the stories connection, or should I just work on the individual stories first?
I think personally I would tackle doing the individual stories and fleshing out what you'd want to see. I think tying in like everything can end up to you having to revise some of these and go back and rewrite some things, but I think it is much easier to tie in stuff that already exists when, rather than having to tie in something that you don't have completely like set and figured out.
Okay. I'd say honestly, more than anything, it's important that you have something to tie into these things, but then it's equally important to have those connections there and ingrained into it. So my greatest recommendation would be to start working on those individual concepts, and then before you've completely finalized them, start working on how they interact with each other. The best thing you can do is, it's kind of just like building a little house of blocks. You need to have your blocks finished before you can build the house, but you might want to adjust how the blocks look on the outside once you've put them into the shape of your house.
Yeah. Or you might have to just take out some blocks in general, and maybe you want something like a fancier outlay or something, and you just need to go
never be afraid to make adjustments, and never be afraid to work on the two together.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. Oh. We got any other questions?
I think I see 9's normal. Bring it up.
So I kind of have two questions going on right now. The first one is, I feel like I rely far too much on music when thinking up stories and worlds and stuff and all of that kind of stuff. And I feel like it's slightly hindering me a bit because then I listen to the same stuff over and over again. I can't find anything else new that I'm enjoying, and it kind of stops me progressing a lot of the story and just ending up losing interest there. And also, should I be building the world around my characters or the characters around the world that they're set in? There's my two kind of...
Ooh.
Okay.
These are interesting questions. I like these.
To start with the first question about the importance of like diversifying the stuff you look into. One thing that I always recommend is to make don't make an effort, but make an effort. I'm overcomplicating this. Make a solid effort to separate the fact that there are some things that you're going to do for fun, and there are some things you're going to do for research. You might get some good research out of the things you do for fun, and you might get some fun out of the things you do for research. So it's important to take time separately. Sometimes I, for example, despite working so much in world building, I'm a fan of unorthodox FPSs. So yes, I will spend 3 hours straight playing a game with little to no world building in it. But then I will also spend 3 more hours playing some crazy indie game with a whole setup to it. So it's important to do a little bit of both and keep them separate, because if you try to make it all about things that you enjoy completely, you're just going to end up doing those things you've always been doing, which also is important to finding things you don't enjoy and learning from those the same way.
Right, 110%. I keep saying that through this panel. I'm so sorry. It rolls off the tongue. But I agree, very much so, 110%. Forcing yourself and making sure you do your homework is essentially what I feel like is your statement. And I, as a person who relates with you, and that's why I was just this question is making my brain buzz. I am a person who also relies on music heavily for motivation, which is a great source of inspiration. But relying on one thing in particular, you'll end up using it as a crutch. So seeking out inspiration and motivation through different sources is rather important. And sometimes forcing yourself to sit down and play a video game can help break out of that how do you say habit. Just making sure that you do your homework, do things that aren't reliant on that quote unquote crutch is important. So with the second question though, could you repeat that one more time? My where do you have it?
I can get it for you. So the question was primarily about whether you would recommend working on your characters and putting them into your world, or working on your world and putting your characters into them. I don't know if Neil will agree with this, so I'd love to say it first. I would highly recommend that you start working on your world first. If you have characters you want to incorporate it, then feel free to start working on this at the start. But I find that it's very important to recognize how your world affects your characters. So your characters, having grown up and having existed in that world, will be manipulated by that world, especially where they come from. It oftentimes comes into that it's a psychological concept. I always forget the name of it, but the difference between how their upbringing affects them and how their actions affect them. So it's important to know how your world will change your character, just as much as it's important to know how your character will change their world. But Neo sounds like they disagree with that.
Ooh, I as a person who has very strictly manifested characters first and then fleshed out the world around them. I would disagree, but the points that Robin did just make are very good. If anything, it's making me come to a middle ground of, I suppose it's dependent on the instance, and it's not something that is just black and white. So you can totally make characters and then create a world around them, but you can also manifest a world and set that ground and set that base very nicely, so you can have characters that are very prim and proper within that setting. So if anything, I'm disagreeing with myself. Oh my god,
It could depend on the circumstance more than anything. Sometimes it might be best to focus on what you think you want to do. For example, I can say myself, I've run into the problem where when I started developing lore for my persona, I personally ran into some pitfalls trying to fit them into the world around them. It's still possible, but it might be a little more difficult. So you might just want to think of which you value more, the characters you already have, or the world that you're making for them.
Right. Which one do you want to put on the cutting board? Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
We are running kind of low on time, so I think we should switch to Discord or Twitch questions. Oh? Oh, we have an extra 15 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, an extra 15 minutes. All right.
We have an extra 15 minutes. I think. Lovely.
Okay,
Okay. I
fantastic.
think we are going to shift to Discord questions for now so we can make a little time for Twitch questions. So,
Hook us up, Sora. Hook
Sora
us up,
and
Odo.
Odo, if y'all could hit us up.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Is this good? Okay.
Sure.
All
Pretty
right.
loud and
So
clear.
I have been making, obviously doing a lot of world building for a long time, but one thing that's always, I guess, been difficult for me is trying to convey my world building ideas, because obviously this is more D&D related. So, but one thing that I've always had difficulty is trying to get my players to, I guess, understand how things work in that world. I guess, if that makes sense. So, like, I guess one thing it's always very rough to do is finding a good balance between simplicity and the complexity, and being able to have them, I guess, fit into there.
I will say, oftentimes when it comes to developing ethos or your world for a tabletop setting, the hardest thing to work with, in my opinion, is your players. Because whenever you're making an experience that they can manipulate that much, you want to both make it something that they can have a large place in, but also one that they're bounded by your rules. So one of the best ways I've found to kind of incorporate that and bring them into it is to provide a kind of introduction and take advantage of your NPC's abilities to give them facets about the world kind of fluidly. It's a skill that you'll need to develop, but being able to get your NPCs and the characters in your environment, and sometimes even items or historical events and things like that, to show rather than tell your characters things that they're supposed to have already known, it takes a little bit of narrative fluidity, and it takes a little bit of practice. But the most important thing it comes down to is kind of just going on and telling them, but making it subtle and discreet.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I agree 100%. About 110%. Missed that 10% mark. Sorry, but no.
Lovely.
All right. Do we have any
Sora, do we have any
questions?
Discord questions?
Yeah. That sounds like a no for me.
I was checking the Discord and I saw a lot of questions. Sora might just not be here right now.
Sora might be AFK. All right. You got the hookup on that?
Well,
okay. Looks like.
I was just scrolling through them because there's a lot.
Oh, okay, got it. Just making sure.
Dang. Okay.
No worries. Oh boy. Oh, there is a lot. Oh boy.
Oh no. Oh no. I'm not
Y'all
seeing
are
it.
excited
oh, no.
today.
I should also.
Here's a good one. So
Sure.
this is kind of good for everyone. How do you decide on like coming up with names for like plants, cities, etc., stuff like that?
Take it. I can't. I can't.
Okay, so we were memeing on this a little bit because we totally discussed this before. Naming things.
We cut it out.
I mean, we like mentioned it, but we did cut it out eventually because naming things like stinks super hardcore. But there was this one like, don't hate us. It's a TikTok, and it was for D&D naming things. It was something. I don't remember the premises of it because of my goldfish brain.
So, generally speaking, even excluding the TikTok, there are a lot of tips and tricks to coming up with names. And the best way I have found, I will lead this in the TikTok, but I won't start with it, is that looking at your environment and looking how other things in the real world have named things, this helped me out a lot. Particularly when I mentioned before I was working on a religion, I spent a couple days trying to figure out the name for it. And in doing so, I started looking up what the meanings were for the names of actual religions. Which led me to realize that, don't worry, it's not that you're bad at naming, it's that no one is good at naming. Because, for example, Christianity is named after Christ, which in, I believe, Hebrew is simply the name of Messiah. So more often than not, a lot of your names are simply just things that are translated from other languages or things that simply describe what they are. So oftentimes it's safe to just kind of either, in my case, I like to look up what it is in other languages. I named an entire species in my sci-fi world building off of water in French. So it's not that bad to just kind of make something simple and adapt it to your surroundings. Though oftentimes you can even kind of like come up with things that aren't names and form them into names, which I think is a lot of what the TikTok was going off of, to simply find words that can describe your character or your place or your thing or things like that, and in some cases even make acronyms and kind of jury-rig them into names. Oftentimes when it comes to naming conventions, they're going to be wildly different depending on how your world works, how you want it to work, or how much you care. So jury-rigging things into names, finding names from simple concepts and just adapting them into what you want, there's nothing wrong with it. There are no really bad names unless you're kind of pulling it from nowhere. The most important thing, in my opinion, is to make sure there's meaning in the name.
I mean, people totally memed on like the names used for Death Stranding, and even then, like I still like the funny names like Mama and Dead Man. Like it can be that simple. Yeah, I, if anything, there's like the Kojima name generator thing that's super funny. Take inspiration from that, if anything, too. Like literally, like names are hard. Don't punch yourself about it. And going about it, do what Robin said. I'm also very guilty of like taking like my one cat character that I have, Canel, is like cinnamon or caramel in French. And then being Japanese, I have a lot of characters that have Japanese names because that's what I know most. And with Japanese, I feel like it's a little easier to just be like Yokosuka or like Hiroyama or like some stuff. And that's literally like Hiroyama is like something. It's something mountain. And all that stuff. So you can just very much so just slap things together and not sweat too much about it. So, but I'm a little bit of a hypocrite for saying that.
The real world doesn't make crazy names. I mean, Tokyo quite literally means like City of the Sun. What is it?
It's like southwest or like something or like north. It's directions, and I am blanking on it right now. Even though
most names are literally just describing what it is. If humans in real life do that, you're totally fine to do it too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have two other really good questions in here.
Sure.
One that really caught my eye was how to approach world building with a group.
Ooh, that's really good. That is a good question, first and foremost. I have no experience doing that. Do you?
I mean, that's the thing with like RPing, because I've been doing that with Sonic. So I've been having a situation where I get to RP with a good friend of mine, and we just like randomly started. So I can't say I know much about like planning this. It just like ended up happening for me. Where now both of our characters are canonically in each other's storylines and whatnot. But with that though, it's very much so from my experience been like flesh out something, introduce it to the person or people that you're working with and see if they can tear it apart and manifest it into something that you are both satisfied with. That's about it with what I know when it comes to fleshing out a world with somebody else. It is create something, see their adaptations, be satisfied with it, or come to a point that you both can agree with that idea or subject, and then tie it in like any other idea to the best of your both abilities. So
yeah, from my little experience, oftentimes I think the biggest difference is that you first and foremost you'll be doing a lot more idea bouncing because different people are going to want different inputs in it. But more than anything, just bounce ideas off of each other and use it the same way you would do it if you were the only one making the world, but instead of your opinion being the final opinion, it's everyone's opinion.
Yup. I think that's about it. Yeah. Don't have too much experience with it, but I think that hopefully covers that question. I apologize. I don't know too much more about it.
This one's kind of a mixed question because there's two questions that were similar to each other, but they're kind of like, the same, I guess.
Sure.
It is basically, how do you decide on the level of detail of, like between what subjects are most important, and then
how do you decide, based on the detail from those specific aspects, basically how to get the players hooked onto those when they're involved to your world building?
So actually, I can provide great input for this right off the bat. A lot of times, how deep and detailed your information is going to be based off two things: what you want to describe and what you want your players or viewers or whatever to know. A biggest thing that comes back is to, I believe I said earlier in the presentation, that depending on what your viewers are and what information they, in the position they're in, would know, often can change how much information you need to make. If your character is a microbiologist, they may need to know a lot about how biology works in your setting, and you may need to flesh that out a lot more. But if your entire setting takes place in one city, then you probably aren't going to need to flesh out the other cities or countries nearly as much. It's all about what you're going to depict in your world. And when it comes to deciding what you should depict and what you want your players to know in that sense, oftentimes it just comes down to what they need to know and what you want them to know. A lot of times, how much detail you go into is up to you to decide. Just make sure that you balance what you want with what you want your players to get. And oftentimes, what you want your players to get is just what you want. No one else can really tell you what that should be.
Oh, very well said. Wow.
All right, so I got another one here in the chat. How do you decide between whether your world should be more story-driven between the story or the actual world itself, like world building, or like how the story developed?
I think honestly, it should be like an even ground, in my opinion. One shouldn't like overpower the other because they both are supposed to work together. So there should be more of one than the other. TLDR.
Your story and your environment are driven by your world, but the most important thing to consider also is that you're the one making it. I think, honestly, the biggest part of the balance should be the scale of the project. If you're making a very short game, then you might not, like, if you're, for example, making something relatively short, your world might not become as prevalent. So I think a lot of it's less about finding a balance between the two, and it's less about deciding which one to value more and deciding how much each one should be valued separately. I think world building and story building are birds of a feather, but they don't necessarily stick together, in that your world will drive your story. However, it only drives it as much as you want it to, and only drives it as much as you need it to. So they should be balanced to an extent, but how that balance works out is dependent on the platform you're working on, how much you want them to balance together. There are some great stories that don't have a whole lot of world building behind them, especially ones that take place in things like modern day or things that are supposed to be based off of real life.
Even like thinking back to it, I'm thinking like Greek mythology. Like, did they really flesh out their worlds all too much?
A lot of Greek mythology fleshed out individuals. A lot of Greek mythology, because it was based on the real world, which is actually a very big part of this, is that it didn't need to flesh out its lore because its lore was just existence. A lot of its lore came from stories, which is an important thing to know as well, and that your stories can become lore if they happened far back enough, which is why they're very closely interlocked. But they aren't not necessarily interlocked, but they're connected. Your stories can become a part of your world building, especially if they'd happened in the past. A lot of times, the best way I like to put it is that writing a story is writing your world, but maybe not something super important in it, because it still happens in your world and it can still change it.
Right.
Might not be something for the history books, but it still happened in history, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here.
We can also totally take Twitch questions, because we have 15 minutes, I believe.
Or from the crowd either, if anybody has some like last like running up like questions. I don't want to leave anybody like hanging here. I'm gonna do scouting out. Okay. I'm feeling we're pretty much covered on the crowd. Okay. So we're good.
I'd love to get some Twitch questions in if those are separate. I don't know the specifics of that.
Right.
All right, so here's one. Do you find it easier? Well, it's a long question. Let me definitely read it. Okay, so I'm getting I'm getting told that Twitch questions aren't available. All questions will be in the Discord.
Sure thing. That works.
Okay.
Then we can get out some more Discord questions, because it doesn't look like anyone in the instance has any more questions.
Yeah, I think we ran them dry. We answered all their questions. They're fantastic. Just kidding.
That means we're either doing very well or very poorly.
Yeah.
I guess. Okay, so I'm able to summarize it. Do you find it easier to come up with ideas for the overall narrative or specific character arcs?
Ooh.
Personally,
specific characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Entirely personal preference. I personally am a little more infatuated with narrative design than I am with world building. I absolutely love world building to death, but I like to describe the here and now a little bit more personally. Not that world building isn't equally great, but maybe just a little less.
Gosh. Me, on the other hand, cool kid over here, unlike this nerd. Just kidding. It definitely is up to personal preference, and for me, if anything, world building is definitely a favorite of mine. But amid the world building, it's the character creation aspect, and fleshing out information and characteristics. I'm very I'd like to say that I'm very emotional and emotion based. So having these characters that I can just blast these emotions into is my favorite thing. And then world building and fleshing out the narrative is homework for me. So it's still a lot of fun. But it's something that I'm I'll do that later.
Most of all, don't feel bad if your world building, more than anything, is a vessel for your narrative, because oftentimes that's what it's intended for. World building is a place to put your stories. It's important not to neglect that, but don't feel like you're bad at it or like you're missing out on things if it feels like homework to you.
Right. And that's the thing. I think you brought up a really incredibly important aspect is the that's the whole thing of putting a personal spin to it. You can put your real life problems and experiences into these stories, which might even make them more relatable and personal for somebody. Say the character that I'm in right now is my persona, and she is the main character of my story. I used her as a vessel for gender exploration, and as a role model to be hey, you should be better at this thing. And I based her emotions and aspects of life off of the character Nausicaa from the Valley of the Wind. And so, being able to use Neo as a character helped myself go through a lot of troubles in my life. And also, I think, I've gotten feedback from other people being hey, I like Neo as a character for XYZ reasons that I myself put in for my own personal reasons. So don't be afraid to put, again, those personal experiences or self-reflections onto a character or a narrative. I think it's actually very incredibly important that you do that. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question from Sonic Fox.
You're saying this one.
Who missed my panel? I can't believe he slept in. Okay, go on. Sorry, I got way through.
They would like to know, how are you two so cute? Very important question.
No. Uno reverse card. Uno reverse card. That's the end of the question.
We're supposed to be professional.
We're supposed to be professional. Next question. Get them out of here. Miss you, bud. I need to watch my language. I get really
we're in public.
Aggro. Yes, I get really aggro with them. So they're goofy, dummy self. Love and miss them. Next question.
I'll beat them up later.
Yes, we will absolutely beat them up later, especially for missing this. They're not here right now. I'm so mad at them. We're professional.
Yes. We have a question here. Someone would like to know, when writing, basically when brainstorming and having all these ideas, how do you guys decide what to keep or use?
I keep the things that I like.
Keep the things that vibe. Honestly, I don't know how else to explain it.
I think, yeah,
It's like-
simply put. Yeah.
There are three things that I typically think about whenever incorporating new ideas into my narrative. First of all, how much it already fits in the pre-existing narrative, how much of a hassle it will be to fit it into the pre-existing narrative, and how much I like it. And it's important that you balance all three of these because, honest to God, if you like something enough, fucking shut up. You just put it into your narrative. I finally broke it. I'm so sorry. Just shove it into your narrative.
The one who
Have a
did
good
it, not
time.
me. Yeah,
Okay.
I can't believe it was Robin
Iris.
who did that and not me.
Look. I'm speaking from the heart here. You can tell it's authentic.
Yeah, it's been hard not to
First
swear
and
during this entire
foremost,
thing.
we swear like sailors. First and foremost,
Mm.
if you like something, if you really like something, if it's a good idea and you believe it's a good idea, screw up everything in your world building for it. Because remember, at the end of the day, this is your world. You're doing what you want to do with it. And if you try and just keep things out that you like because they won't fit into what the narrative is now, sometimes, use your best judgment, it might just be a good idea to adjust the narrative. This is your world.
Mhm.
Put what you like into it.
Yeah. And even then, I think another thing is like, say there is something that you're not super like crazy about, but think that your audience would like resonate with a lot. I think that's an exception that can be executed with the whole like put in what you like kind of idea. Because initially when I heard that question, I was just like, just keep what you like inside. But there are definitely exceptions. It's not as simple as that. It definitely is not as simple as that, and it was a very good question. And I'm glad it was brought up because some things can be looked at this like black and white kind of like contrast of like, oh, it should be this simple. It is never that simple. Definitely look at stuff under a magnifying glass when you have the chance, but don't do it too much. Kind of situation. Same thing with like artwork. You don't want to be zoomed in at like 100% all the time. You want to look at the whole picture for a majority of the time, and then you can zoom in, work on some stuff here and there. So to really find like finesse the details on very important parts, say like the face or like the main focal point of the piece. Everything has parallels. Everything connects.
Everything connects. That's the fun thing about world building.
Yeah.
So another question here. How do you two go about building a protagonist's motivations?
Okay, this is our last question.
I love this question. I love this question. I'm super glad that it's our last question. Yes. Oh my god. So I mean, it's like, where do I even begin? It's tying in like the fact of like project yourself through like what you want as a motivator for your character. My biggest example was using Nausicaa from The Valley of the Wind, the Studio Ghibli film, as my like the main like the basis of my character's motivation and goals. It's to be, very protective of those that she loves and to save the world, to put basically. And to get to that point, it was very much a personal call on, hey, I like these things. Man, it's tying back to the very much so like the same thing that we just talked about. It's like, I like this thing. I want it to be projected onto my character. I just want it Baja Blast, and I want it to be the main ringer for this. But like, say with like bad guys too, which is another thing. Like, what inspires like the motivation for these bad guys to be as evil as they are? And the one example that I can have from my own personal world is this. He is a mess. I wanted a character that was relatable but evil all in the same stroke, to make it more complex. And his motivation is to seek vengeance over deceased family members, and having this blind rage against this main character, Neo, even though she isn't at fault for the death. The reason why his family members passing is because of Neo's family members and all that, blah, blah, blah. I'm taking way too long to explain this, but the motivation was to complex things and add like a twist of, I want to fall in love with this bad guy, but he is bad kind of thing. So it's all personal preference. Sorry,
I will say,
stop talking so much.
Personally, I think the most important thing to answer this question is actually to remove the word protagonist. So when it comes to organizing any character, you want to make sure they have a motivation, because this adds dynamics to them, generally speaking. Of course, you need to incorporate how static and how dynamic you want the character. So, of course, not every side character you're going to spend 2 hours writing the documentation for why they do what they do. But it's important to know that everyone has motivations. And one thing that I've found that works great for tabletop campaigns and even just for making characters is to figure out what it is that drives what your character does. And this can be anything. Oftentimes, you can bring it from your own ideas. This especially works well in protagonists because that means you'll be able to write them very well, very easily. But it's also important to figure out just what everyone wants and values. You can use the lore, you can use their background to determine this, even if you just have to use one word. That one word can be developed on that one character. You might make a character, for example, you want their motivator to be guilt, and you want this to be something that they overcome later. Guilt could work for a side character, or maybe a major character. Maybe for your protagonist, you might want to define what that guilt is, how it portrays itself, how they respond to it, and all of these things can be adjusted in the future, which is also very important, and that much like everything else about your character, your motivators can shift. So it's important to just kind of like find something that interests you as a motivator, very simply, and then expand it however much you need to.
Yep.
I often find it's great to just pick an emotion and then make that emotion into something really big.
Yeah, that's a really good way to do it. With that, though, I think that will be the end of our Q&A for the stream. We will still be in this instance for those who want to discuss further, but that will be the end of it. And thank you all again so much for coming through and partaking within this. It is an absolute honor to be here at Furality and host a panel about something that both I and Robin, I can definitely speak on his behalf, are passionate about. So thank you.
Thank you. Follow us on Twitter.
Oh my god! Oh my god. I'm not the one doing it. You're doing all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. What the hell?
Follow them. I just post memes.
I do artwork and fart sometimes. Art and fart over in my direction. Haha.
Is that it? Is it cut?